You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans,
I'm Connor.
and I'm Alex.
We're going to talk about Star Wars today, but not just Star Wars.
As we did back at episode 50, where we had media inspired by Star Wars, we wanted to focus tightly on a piece of science fiction media that actually predated Star Wars, but now postdates Star Wars as well, and
Mhm.
that is Dune by Frank Herbert.
You'll hear people often saying that, oh, George Lucas stole Star Wars from Frank Herbert and Dune, and that's not really the case. I can point to one direct reference to spice, and Han Solo being a spice runner. But I think that anything that may provide connections are more broad and thematic than that, not so specific as to say that Star Wars has stolen anything from Dune.
Yeah, so the first Dune novel was released in 1959 by a Frank Herbert and is a science fiction political thriller set in the far future, centered around the character of Paul Atreides, a prophetic future-seeing prince who eventually launches holy roller across the whole galaxy.
Duke, or pre-Duke.
Yeah.
I don't know what
Oh yeah.
the
Well, sorry.
yeah.
Duke, heir to a duke, and then emperor.
Hmm.
Um, so obviously, it's a whole story. It's a science fiction story that doesn't shy away from politics and has space magic. So
Hmm.
some people conflate a lot of that with Star Wars. Our intention here is not to be like who did what first, but to see the same philosophical space that both are operating in and how they compare and contrast to each other.
Hmm.
Because of course, all of these works don't exist in a vacuum. And the recent Denis Villeneuve, am I pronouncing his name right?
I don't know if he knows how to pronounce his name right.
Yeah. So the
Denis
recent
Villeneuve, maybe. Yeah.
the recent Dune films have rejuvenated interest in the Dune franchise
Mhm.
at the same time that Star Wars has started releasing more content. So I think some compare and contrasting is inevitable. And as they are both high-powered science fiction franchises in a world that does not have a lot of high-powered science fiction franchises, we wanted to compare and contrast the two.
Yeah, and just in the same way that Star Wars didn't steal from Dune, Dune is also not just Star Wars for adults. Dune is Game of Thrones for science fiction fans. There's a difference.
Well,
Uh,
and of course, Dune came far, far before George
Either,
R. R.
yeah.
Martin wrote anything, releasing in his 1990s release of A Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
So let's look at some commonalities between Dune and Star Wars.
Hmm.
There are six original Dune novels written by Frank Herbert himself, which span thousands of years, and basically look at the downfall, establishment, and so on of a galactic space empire.
Hmm.
So there's, but I guess it's comparisons. But one key difference to keep in mind is Star Wars is a secondary setting. Star
Hmm.
Wars is set in a galaxy far, far away, which is like Once Upon a Time is shorthand for not this world. Earth does not exist. We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto.
Hmm.
Whereas Kansas very much canonically existed in Dune at some point.
Yeah, it's not there in the forefront of the story, but all these individuals, these humans, originated from Earth longer than 10,000 years ago. And it's a view so far into the future where the galaxy might not be recognizable, but the politics are. So we have multiple different families who are vying for power, who are being manipulated by the Empire. And I mean, we have desert planets. Dune is largely set on this planet that is the progenitor of the spice drug that everyone in the universe is hooked on, and it's necessary for certain groups to enact in space travel and navigation, to enact in genetic control of houses and families.
Yeah. So commonalities. So we
Hmm.
have the existence of an empire in space.
Hmm.
There is an emperor. He's an antagonistic figure. Whereas Palpatine is an evil, sneering, powerful figure with command of the Force and can zap people he doesn't like to
Hmm.
death, and achieved his power through careful, decades-long manipulation of the political structure to finally seize complete control of the entire galaxy in a coup.
Hmm.
Um, the Emperor in Dune is the is the most recent in a long string of emperors who have been uncertain in their power and have been attempting to balance the power of various great houses.
Mhm.
Uh, Dune has this sort of feudal feel to it, whereas Star Wars does not. Star
Mhm.
Wars has sort of still this used future part of it, but I don't. There's not this. There was a sort of this neo feudalist sort of take in Dune, where there's dukes and nobles and the noble obligation to their servants and everything. Uh, Star Wars leans more on there are moffs and captains and sort of a more modern political structure. There's
Mhm.
a Senate. I mean, these draw the Senate all back to Rome, but it's certainly more of a growing out of that tradition,
Mhm.
like late Roman into modern, and skipping over the whole Western European feudalist structure that has been mapped onto the Dune context.
Mhm. Yeah, Dune so much more is about vendetta. It is about certain families owing fiefdom to their emperor. It's uh, a different focus for a story. I would say that our protagonist in Dune, Paul, is almost like a combination of Luke and Leia as one person, where they're the chosen one of sorts, but Leia starts off with privilege, Luke does not. Paul starts off with privilege, but also the knowing and understanding eventually that he is uh, destined to bring balance to the galaxy. Oh, wait, that's Luke. Uh,
So that brings us into both the our protagonists,
mhm.
both on a desert planet.
One who finds himself on a desert planet,
One
which is
who
Paul,
desperately wants to leave a desert planet.
which is Luke. So the Paul comes to terms with who he is in this foreign land, whereas Luke is so desperate to leave, and only by happenstance does he ever return. Um, in Dune, the aforementioned planet of Dune is the most important key part that exists throughout all six books, uh, no matter what time, how many thousands of futures bridge the gap. In Star Wars, Tatooine is a stopping point. Um, it still comes back frequently because George Lucas likes his deserts and J.J. Abrams likes his deserts. Because Tanzania is, I guess, cheap to film at. Instant production value when you get a
Yeah,
desert in your film.
which is why they made Tatooine a hyperspace nexus
Hmm.
in that it's there's not much there, but it's on the way to everywhere.
Hmm.
Uh,
So very different types of settings, but as far as the characters of Paul and Luke go, uh, so as I said, Luke doesn't have the same sort of privileges that Paul has, but he still is gifted this sword King Arthur type style and this destiny, and Paul is given this destiny. He is going to, uh, you know, grow to power. He is going to free the people of Dune. Um, he has this prophecy built around him. Luke doesn't have that right away, but we learn in the story that that is very much motivating his family. This idea of prophecy of power. Um,
yeah, so let's
yeah.
let's let's look at the use of like foresight and prophecy,
Hmm.
because those are both present in both the characters of the Jedi who have foresight and prophecy. Like
Hmm.
Anakin was the chosen one, and then later Luke was fulfilled his prophecy instead.
Hmm.
And then Paul is literally been prophesied for thousands of years to
Yeah.
arise. And then they try to backpedal, like, no, wait, you're not the prophesied one we wanted. And he's like, too late, I'm here.
Too
Um,
bad.
and that even like he's like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to be here, but actually I can't turn off my destiny. So
Yeah.
whereas Luke's destiny is seen as a positive thing, he will become
Hmm.
the last true Jedi. He will defeat the Emperor and his father. He will reestablish a Jedi Order. He sees this destiny as a good thing. He struggles to live
Yeah.
up to it. He struggles with the decision he needs to make, but
Hmm.
generally his destiny of the chosen one is considered a good thing.
And this has been in place for millennia. We don't know who originated the prophecy. For all we know, this is handed down from the mystics. With Dune, we know that Paul's prophecy is all human manipulation, stretching back hundreds of years, where his mother is a group of people known as the Bene Gesserit witches. And this is where some of our space magic comes in because they have the power of premonition, they have the power of generational memory recall, where kind of like Assassin's Creed, they can go back and remember things in the lives of their ancestors past. And they've been manipulating the galaxy so that down the line, they would make the way for them to come into power, no matter what planet they're
Yeah,
on.
they want to bring about
Hmm.
in Star Wars, it's the chosen one who will bring balance to the Force.
Hmm.
In Dune, it is the Kwisatz Haderach, the basically an Ubermensch who will be able to see all of time as a singular line and be unbound by the weaknesses of
Hmm.
humans and can guide them and decide. It's a very eugenicist approach,
Yeah.
which is Frank Herbert was knowingly talking about
Eugenics
because
bad. Yeah.
yeah, and he was definitely criticized the Bene Gesserit for practicing eugenics for
Hmm.
thousands of years to try to breed their savior, which is just distasteful on many levels,
Hmm.
and in universe is portrayed as distasteful on many levels.
Yeah.
Uh, so Paul is like, I am the product of 1,000 generations of eugenics breeding to try to produce me, and guess what? I'm here.
Hmm.
So he feels increasingly trapped because in the midpoint of the story, he gains the ability to pretty freely see the future,
Hmm.
but it doesn't give him any joy because he knows it's not a perfect recall, but he feels trapped because he knows that every decision he makes, what the effects will be, and he knows there is
Hmm.
no way he can make any decisions that will bring him a good galaxy, just a less bad one.
Yeah.
Whereas, so where Luke is hopeful, he's like, I have. If Luke could see the future and knew, oh, eventually I will attempt to murder my nephew,
Hmm.
and that. So picture like Luke on Octo, but like how broken he was. Paul like is already standing on Octo 30 years before he's had his Jedi Order
Hmm.
destroyed. So
Seeing it happen, unable to do anything because he knows that there's a narrow path of success that they have. Uh, when Luke sees the future, he sees that his friends are in danger. He makes decisions to go and save them. Whether these are manipulated, because we learned that Palpatine, the Emperor, can manipulate these visions and Force users, or manipulate them in general. Paul has no manipulation. He doesn't see exactly what's going to happen, but he sees the options of what's going to happen, and it helps to separate the magic system because while the Force is it's ubiquitous, it is understood that it's this energy that combines and binds everyone in the galaxy. In Dune, you have people called mentats who take drugs to think like computers. You have Bene Gesserit who take drugs to see the future. It's very more tactile and human, where these powers, aren't just be gifted of your spirit, but they are part of Paul's eugenics. They're part of the world that has been forced to move in a certain direction. In this case, without the use of AI and intelligent machines.
yeah, yeah. So I think some people draw the parallel between Dune and Star Wars, where both of them sort of reject this sort of. I mean, you have like the Star Trek version, which is like high computer, super clean, instant calculation, androids and artificial humans, and almost this
Hmm.
cyberpunk uber technology. So lots of like really powerful technology exists in both settings, like the ability to travel faster than lights and all that, but both of them have this sort of used future aspect where the
Hmm.
technology has been around a long time. There's not a lot of innovation, but I think there are key differences
Hmm.
between them that does make them distinct. So in Star Wars, you have droids who are
Hmm.
artificial beings, though the fact whether they are beings or machines or
Hmm.
slaves is not really grappled with in a meaningful way.
Right, they're always subjugated to some degree.
Yeah, see our episode
Yeah.
about droid rights if you would like to know
Hmm.
more. Um, but in Dune, there are no computers or thinking machines, as they call them, at all, because at some point there was artificial intelligence that attempted to wipe out mankind.
And it's Frank Herbert's son Brian muddied the waters as far as the backstories go. So as far as his writings go, it is yes, the computers took control. In the original Dune, it was people who took control of computers to exert control on others. So it all comes down to technology being misused to the point where there is no artificial intelligence
Yeah,
in the future of Dune, and that remains a constant throughout the core six books at least.
yeah. There's not really this condemnation of certain technologies in Star Wars that Dune has. Like
Hmm.
Dune really grapples with the is artificial intelligence good or bad? Is all this and in Star Wars? I mean, you have Vader talking about all
Hmm.
this technological terror you have constructed,
Hmm.
but that's mostly in comparison, believing that the Force is more powerful. He doesn't refuse to use starfighters
Yeah.
or think that his lightsaber, which is made with a plasma conduit and all this focusing lens and all this advanced technology, is bad. He flies a TIE fighter with a hyperdrive. So um, the Jedi do not, and there's not really a whole lot that reject
Mm-hmm.
advanced technology other than a few fringe sects
Mm-hmm.
in Star Wars. Whereas in Dune, there are taboos that certain technologies are just not usable or not appropriate for
Mm-hmm.
use in a civilized society. And I think this comes across that Dune was released closer to the conclusion of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Herbert would have lived through that period,
Yeah.
and whereas George Lucas was writing at a time when the Vietnam War was ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't want to do a direct allegory between that, but the uses of technology and even the worlds between the 50s and the 70s were very different.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think you then have some of the adaptation decisions made by Villeneuve in the modern movies are then understandable because now we're depicting
Mm-hmm.
it to an audience that exists in the third decade of the 21st century.
Yeah. I don't. It brings to mind laser swords. Uh, if we take a look at the art of combat in both series, it helps to illustrate maybe the motivations behind either. Laser swords look cool. Big explosions look cool. Star Wars doesn't always think about, why do the Jedi use lightsabers? They give a line that it's a more elegant way of combat, that Jedis are more principled, but there's really no utilitarian value to having a laser sword other than it looks cool. Dune is able to get away with that by, in being a piece of prose that has the time to explore well. Everyone has an individual personal shield to deflect any sort of fast moving projectiles, so they found a workaround, which is to use a blade and to slowly enter the shield and then come into contact with whatever's on the other side. So the both media are very much entrenched in blade combat. So many knives, so many swords in Dune, but there is a different sort of utility behind it other than looks cool. Not that looking cool is a bad thing, but Star Wars doesn't need the audience to question why certain things happen, whereas Dune being set in a very far future universe from Earth, it doesn't get away with that as much. It's not seen as a fantasy story. So any other aspects like that where there are similarities between the two, but the approach is different.
So I think we have to compare the Jedi with the Bene Gesserit.
Mm-hmm.
So in both settings, have a mystical order of monastic individuals
Mm-hmm.
who mostly operate independently, are largely supportive of the existing regime, at least before the fall of the Jedi,
Mm-hmm.
and are largely misunderstood or not understood by the populace at large.
Yeah.
But the Jedi are largely regarded as heroic, or were in their day, despite the propaganda by the Empire that the Jedi attempted to overthrow them. After the resurrection of the New Republic, and even then, the Jedi were regarded as heroic and helpful. The Bene Gesserit are regarded as mystical and unknowable, venerated in some ways, but
Mm-hmm.
more so in sort of the awe-inspiring, fearful way. And the Bene Gesserit are not public about what they do whatsoever, and they are utterly unscrupulous and pragmatic. So, whereas the Jedi have ideals, the Bene Gesserit have goals.
Mm-hmm.
The Bene Gesserit's goals are to bring forth the Kwisatz Haderach and to bring forth other powerful individuals into positions where they can be controlled. They focus on the linchpins and means of manipulation of powerful people. They're the ones who set off the coup against and assassination of Paul's family because Leto Atreides is destabilizing the order that they would like. Then they try to put the genie that is Paul back in the bottle when they decide, Kwisatz Haderach or not, we're not ready for that, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really work very well for them. But because they don't have control over him like they would like to for their Ubermensch.
Mm-hmm. And that's another key difference is that they're a very gendered group where Jedi, men and women, creatures of all species alike, Bene Gesserits are all female, and their Kwisatz Haderach is a man, and it's almost this interpretation of we are going to generate the most perfect man who has all of the insight of our feminine wiles, but will be accepted as leader across the cosmos. Um, that's my interpretation of it as well. I should say that these are books that I've also read. That's a first for one of our podcasts.
Yeah, I've read the first Dune book. I'm
Yeah.
relying on Connor's knowledge for Dune books 2 through 6.
Oh, it gets weird. It gets so weird, and the gender politics just keep going. But
Yeah,
we're not going to talk about the God Emperor Sandworm Man at this point.
yeah, because Dune grapples with sort of a modern gender role sense, but
Mm-hmm.
as where Star Wars, for all the you know sense that people have that it's not as like progressive as like Star Trek, it certainly isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But Star Wars is still depicted as a future where gender roles barely matter because I mean, there's people with the corn with tentacle faces are walking around
Mm-hmm.
and all that. There's no sense that Leia is any less capable a general because she is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
She's addressed as princess as a term of respect, but she's equally leader of the strike force as Han
Mm-hmm.
Solo. Mon Mothma is the leader of the rebellion. Uh,
Just as equal in her ability to escape the Death Star as her would be uh, uh, rescuers.
yeah, Captain Phasma is just totally fine being a captain of the First Order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people's gender is barely even mentioned in
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars, honestly, other than when there are people with interest. Like I'm trying to think of, I know even overt depictions of sexism, even from
Mm-hmm.
evil characters anywhere in Star Wars that you can think of.
Oh, there's more
Is there
droid racism than anything.
Yeah, is there a Master Paku around who's like, I will not train this woman as to
Mm-hmm.
be a Jedi? And I can't think of an instance
Yeah.
of, yeah. So, and whereas like that kind of casual sexism is common in Dune because
Mm-hmm.
their society is neo-feudal and sort of trapped in the past. So relying on these old forms of gender politics and control to subjugate and manage society.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, yeah, Dune society is still, I mean, there's these houses that have different cultures and they're sort of stratified, whereas Star Wars is cosmopolitan in the extreme. Like there's the mixing of people and races and cultures. I mean, you walk in the cantina on Tatooine, and there's your galaxy right there.
Mm-hmm. And in Dune, if you were unfortunate enough to be born on planet Getty Prime with the Harkonnen, you will be shaved bald out of the sun to the point that your skin is pearlescent white and will have numerous surgical enhancements that are probably done against your will because that's just a part of their culture. Uh, very much in Dune do we have these groups of people who, uh, I mean, we can take a look at Fremen like Jedi as we did with Bene Gesserit Jedi, where the Fremen are all about equal status, who are about we are fighting for our freedom and the right to rule this planet, because that is the moral right. The Jedi are fighting for the moral right of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It's we get these different sects within Dune that are all either geared towards the same point or they have just been cultured into thinking that way. Um, as far as villainy goes, we have our emperors. Uh, in Star Wars, I mean, we can call the Harkonnens the Hutts, I suppose, where it's a criminal organization, but the Harkonnens have a little bit more of a motivation and
Well,
vendetta
uh,
within their decisions.
and the main character's father, spoilers if you haven't read the first Dune novel, is Baron Harkonnen,
Mm-hmm.
or grandfather rather.
Right.
So have another parallel there where the head of the
Mm-hmm.
antagonists is a relative of our protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
That's a good point to like bring the conversation back to Paul and Luke.
yeah, familial
Yeah.
relationships I think are one of the actually key commonalities here,
Mm-hmm.
in that bloodlines and the relationships between siblings and mother and father and daughter and all that are probably one of the big points of commonality there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have Luke Skywalker, who's also spoilers, descendant of Darth Vader. We have these two heroes who are trying to learn from and prevent mistakes from the past. I think we can argue, our hypothesis is that Luke goes through the hero's journey and has an ascending journey where he ascends to a higher state of awareness and morality, whereas Paul descends. He becomes a power hungry, manipulative emperor in his own right.
And he knows he's going to become that and he can't change it, and it frustrates the hell out of him.
Mm-hmm. Because it's out of a sense of survival and for the betterment of the galaxy. Uh, he only has to, cause the deaths and starvation of a few billion across that galaxy. So he doesn't make the moral choice as a Luke Skywalker would. Luke Skywalker would have sacrificed himself for the betterment of the galaxy, which he ended up doing. Uh, Paul is much more about self-preservation, vendetta, vengeance, and setting the universe to the state that he thinks is right. And I think that forces him to uh, adopt power that he might not be ready for. Really, in the Dune books, it's not until the next generation that this Kwisatz Haderach is supposed to come. And when you get to Children of Dune, that will end up being the case. Um, Kind of like the same way where Anakin is called the Chosen One, but it's up to his children in order to work to redeem him and bring true balance to the galaxy. Do we have the same state with Paul, where Paul unifies the galaxy but plunges it into darkness, and then his son has to continue on and bring the galaxy upon the golden path, be this figure that's hated and vilified, but all for the purpose of helping the rest of the galaxy survive. It's a much more complex arc than we won. The
Yeah.
bad guys are done.
Yeah. I just want to draw a parallel for anyone who's watched the anime Code Geass. The must become the hated emperor is definitely a plot point that Code Geass stole from Dune then, or adapted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the other points we need to compare between Dune and Star Wars is alien life.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Wars is lousy with alien life. Every planet evolved its own unique life. We've done entire
Mm-hmm.
episodes devoted to just exploring a fraction of the various near human races, not
Mm-hmm.
to mention the inhuman beasts and strange energy beings and sentient Twi'leks and all the hundreds and hundreds of species that are present across the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah.
In Dune, everyone is human.
Yes.
So whether they've been genetically modified to live on high gravity environments or whatever, but the original origin of all sentient life is
Mm-hmm.
human. The only notable alien life are the sandworms of Arrakis.
Right. And they're animals. They're not so much cognitive speaking aliens. The beings in Dune and other races in the Dune books are defined by how inhuman they are, whether it be the Beni Tleilax who have experimented on themselves for years and years and years, and no one really knows where the Beni Tleilaxu women are. Uh, they've separated themselves from humanity so far. The Guild Navigators, who we haven't seen in the Villeneuve version, but we sure as hell saw in the David Lynch version, uh, inundate themselves with so much spice that they mutate and expand their mind to the point where they can allow for safe navigation between planets, but they do not look like people anymore. So they have alien characteristics, but it all comes down to being a human story and what uh, we have the choice to do in order to survive.
So you're saying that the physical changes in the bodies in Dune might be a commentary on how society has twisted them into unnatural shapes, and so, but not only internally but externally as well.
A wee bit, a wee
Just a
bit,
small bit.
just a small bit.
Body horror is a way of commenting on mental horror.
Right.
Oh, I'm being a little sarcastic, but that's a primary theme of Dune would be how the trappings of the unhealthy society that they live in have externalized themselves onto the bodies of the people forced to participate in it.
Which we can bring back to Darth Vader. We mentioned body horror in Darth Vader, and uh, the consequence of his actions are to be encased in a plastic and metal tomb for the rest of his living life.
Yeah, and that's still regarded as a biosynthetic fusion
Mm-hmm.
between for Darth Vader, and it's a prosthetic that allows him to survive. It's not really particularly lauded,
Mm-hmm.
but again, neither Star Wars is not really a post-nature society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nature has its place, and most planets are not so developed as like Coruscant, where there is no nature.
Mm-hmm.
But and there's like powerful creatures such as the Rathtars and the Rancors that are
Mm-hmm.
really hard to control with modern technology. But there are places and times in Star Wars that are entirely post-nature,
Mm-hmm.
where they're not concerned about the interaction with the natural environment. Whereas in Dune, the planet of Arrakis is so hostile that the native fauna must always be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that Dune is an ecological story as well, where uh, Star Wars doesn't really talk too much about that big polluted planet.
Well, it does if you watch Star Wars Vision Season 2.
True, very true. So pieces of Star Wars media
Yeah, more
definitely
modern
do.
Star Wars have started to
Hmm.
grapple with this question of societal injustice and environmentalism.
Hmm.
Um, Star Wars has always been more about the hero's journey and universal human themes more than contemporary commentary on society.
Hmm.
I say that because it's just subtext rather than text.
Hmm.
Star Wars can also be read as a very firm allegory of criticism of imperialism
Sure.
from day one. So
Hmm.
let's not make the fallacy that Star Wars has been apolitical ever.
Yeah,
Um,
and I don't mean to minimize what Star Wars is trying to say because it is a very political story, like it has been since being an allegory for world, or I'm sorry,
the Vietnam War,
for the
yeah.
Vietnam War, and then later post 9/11 culture, especially in the prequel trilogy.
Oh, to enormously so. I mean, the
Yeah.
the political order, and then post 9/11 and that whole rise of
Hmm.
fascism. I mean, it's us. George Lucas is many things. A subtle man he is
No.
not. Nor was he trying to be.
Hmm.
So I'm sorry, everyone. There's always been politics in your Star Wars. The existence of women is not political.
Right.
Um, calling calling an antagonist Newt Gunray when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House of the U.S. House of Representatives, early turn of the century, was indeed quite political.
Yeah.
Uh,
Not a subtle political jab.
no, all
No.
right, moving on from that. But Dune is
Yeah.
political. I mean, so they're both highly
Hmm.
politicized works. Dune is definitely a commentary on sort of post-war. I mean, war profiteering is
Hmm.
straight up what the Harkonnens do, but it's also
Hmm.
about how do periods of conflict affect someone's humanity on
Yes.
a personal
Yeah.
level. Star Wars might look at that on the sort of like a societal level, like,
Hmm.
oh, the Clone Wars erode the safety net so a strong executive can seize power
Hmm.
through patriotism and war. But Dune would look at how does this constant state of war and the pressures like affect one person and then the decisions that they make.
And I think taking a look at both the ultimate message in Star Wars is more of an ideal. It's a By the time we get to Return of the Jedi or the time we get to the Rise of Skywalker, the ideal ending has happened. Good triumphs. I don't want to call Dune realist. I would like to call it,
Well, Dune is a tragedy.
yeah, it's a cynical look just because our heroes don't end up well. Uh, I won't get into the spoilers of Paul's end, but it's not a triumphant end as Luke's was. Um,
To quote Alan Wake, if a hero wins in a horror story, it's because they paid the price. So,
yes. So there's tragedy ahead for Paul. Don't look too excited for Dune Messiah to come out and expect the triumphant hero's journey to continue on.
well, anything else parallels between Star Wars and Dune that you would like to highlight, Connor?
I think taking a look just cinematically, recognizing that all Dune adaptations are post Star Wars.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
I think textually,
Hmm.
Dune has an enormous impact philosophically on Star Wars,
Yeah.
but visually, I mean, as far as the depiction of space and planets,
Hmm.
the scope, how technology interacts with a human space or a natural space, Dune is definitely operating in the post Star Wars environment.
How to build a visual world. Um,
Yeah, a secondary
hmm.
visual world without relying on recognizable human landscapes, like no
Hmm.
pyramids of Gaza in the back. Sorry, pyramids of Giza in the background to set the scene. You have to make this an entirely alien environment,
Hmm.
which even though Dune is not technically an entirely secondary setting,
Right.
it is close enough.
They still have to come up with cultures just as you would see like an alien race. I mean, the Harkonnens are as close to an alien race as you can get with how freakish they act and look. But it's just a matter of building out what that culture is, and that's something that we could look at Star Wars along with the used future aesthetic as part of the influence. So just to give Star Wars some credit in coloring the landscape of Dune as much as Dune has influenced Star Wars.
Well, that is our comparison of Dune and Star Wars. Thank you for listening. We will certainly look at other things that Star Wars has influenced or been influenced by. Please drop any questions or thoughts you have in our subreddit at reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars.
Or in the comments of this YouTube video,
If you're on YouTube.
yeah, go to YouTube. I don't know the link, but it's on YouTube. Find it. But
All
yeah,
right.
Until then,
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.